It seems to me that Western culture is experiencing what I think of as a soul crisis because of the dominance of a philosophy that's associated with science. And it's a philosophy which on the surface is a very powerful way of understanding reality, and yet it leaves us in a world which exists for no reason, a universe which has evolved through chance, and it portrays us as here for a short while, few years, like, oh my God, and then gone. So it's a very bleak view of reality, and it's becoming more and more and more dominant. So we end up in a very cold, bleak place. And my own feeling is it's inadequate. The philosophy is not good enough. It doesn't actually account for my experience of what this amazing journey of life actually is. The essential idea behind the new worldview that I've been expressing in my book Soul Story, which I call emergent spirituality, is that we need to understand evolution in a larger sense. That science started with evolution as about biology, with Darwin and Wallace, and then 100 years ago we realized the whole universe had evolved, which is a gigantic idea, actually. 13.8 billion years of evolution. And it's not controversial to say that it's led to the experience of psyche, which means soul. We're experiencing this experience we're having of soul, of another dimension which isn't made of matter, full of ideas. We're experiencing it right now, everyone is. But science, mainstream science, goes, you know, we have physics, we have biology, and then we have this strange thing called the soul or psyche, the mind, the imagination, and it's kind of a byproduct of the brain, and we don't know why or how that happens, but it's part of biology. What I'm suggesting is that that's not true at all, that we need to understand the process of evolution, having looked back and gone, oh, there was a physical phase of evolution before the biological phase. We now need to go, there's a whole soul phase of evolution, which we need to understand in its own right, which comes after the biological phase. So that we see that the whole process, this gigantic journey of evolution, has been leading to the emergence of new things all the time. You know, there was once no water, and then there was. There was once no galaxies, and then there was. There was once no life, and then there was. There was once no sensation, and then there was. There was once no soul, and then it appeared. Everything's been emerging, and when soul emerged, we need to understand that a whole new dimension of reality has arrived. And why I call it emergent spirituality is it seems to me that spirituality, the deep insights and the wisdom of spirituality, is all about that phase of evolution. And if we understand that, we can integrate our scientific knowledge with our spiritual wisdom. The philosophy of emergent spirituality is rooted in a new understanding of time. As a philosopher, my method is to look at the moment and see what presents itself. And when I do that right now, what I see is ever-changing experience, and it's changing in time, or it is time. So time seems fundamental to me, to the nature of reality, and everything is actually a process. We think of things as things, but they're not. They're all, I'm a process, the room's a process, the whole universe is a process. So I want to suggest that we make time not as some context that things are in, but actually the fundamental nature of reality. And that we need a new analogy to understand it, because we have this analogy in English that time passes. But I don't think that's quite accurate. I think actually time accumulates. So there's more time now than when we started this conversation. There's more time now than there was yesterday, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, when the galaxies formed. So that time has been accumulating as the process of evolution has happened, and it hasn't gone anywhere. We tend to think the past has disappeared, but I'm really not sure it has. Because it seems to me that everything that has ever happened in the past is implicitly in the present, which makes this moment what it is. If anything were different, this moment would be not what it is. Anything which has happened, which has come into form, has happened forever, and it's implicit in the moment. So implicit in this moment is me agreeing to have this conversation, and me being invited to have this conversation, and the process that's led up to that. Learning to speak is implicit in this moment. The development of language, the evolution of the human body, the galaxy, chemicals that form my body, everything, the Big Bang itself, is implicit in this moment. So that time, through the process of evolution, there's this stream, and I call it the time stream. And this time stream, which is what arises at the Big Bang, which is moment zero. It's the beginning of time. So as time starts, you have the time stream accumulating, and it's been accumulating now for 13.8 billion years. And as it accumulates, as there's more and more past, it evolves. It arises in more complex forms until we've gone from hydrogen, subatomic particles, to you and I having this conversation. And the conversation is happening in this non-physical domain of soul. It's happening with words, which are just essentially funny noises I'm making with my mouth, but the meaning we are sharing exists in the psyche, in this highly emergent domain that the whole of the process of evolution, the movement of the time stream, has led to. So I would say that the universe is made of time. It's made of the past because it's a process. And we are here at the cutting edge in the moment. And the moment is the meeting of everything that has been and everything that could be, all the possible. So it's the past meets the possible in the present, which is why every moment will always contain everything that has happened, but it will never be the same. It will always be fresh. It's always a new possibility. One of my previous books is called How Long Is Now, because it's a question I found very intriguing and amusing, because when I look at the moment, what I see is that there's a process and you can never catch it, because no matter how small you make the moment, there's always a smaller moment. And yet it has a sense that it's eternal. It's always now. So how do you live with that deep paradox? And I think the idea of the time stream really helps with that, because what it's saying is, look, there is no moment, in a sense, or there is this flow of time, of accumulating time, which is why you can split it up into ever smaller parts. And yet what makes the present is this is where we're conscious, because this is where the past and the possible meet. In fact, actually, it's where all the opposites meet. This is where we can look at the time stream, the universe, and go, it's one thing. And yet also we can say that one thing is made up of many individual time streams. It's many things. And we see that, all of those paradoxes in the moment. And I am one time stream, meeting you, another time stream. And here we are in this present moment, which is eternal, because it's what is where the two meet. Mm-hmm. It's always where the two meet. I have this phrase I like, the self-realizing universe, because it seems to me that the universe is a process of realizing potentiality. So if you think, what existed before the Big Bang? And it seems like an impossible question, but I think we can say this, that what existed before the universe was the potentiality for the universe. So what was there before the Big Bang? A primal potentiality that could be realized as everything that's come into existence. And then you can see the time stream, the process of evolution, as a process through which ever more emergent potentials have been realized. So that the universe is coming into being as time accumulates, as the past becomes deeper. More and more emergent possibilities are realized. We couldn't go straight to a single cell. We had to go through the creation of chemicals. We couldn't go straight to soul. We had to go through the creation of the body, the galaxies, everything. so that the universe is realizing itself in deeper and deeper ways. And this experience we're having right now of soul, of another dimension full of images, the imagination, that's the most emergent dimension, which is why it's so significant. That's why we're spending so much time in it. That's why we're having this conversation in it. And that's in itself leading further, I think. And where it's leading to, it seems to me, is what is traditionally called spiritual awakening, which is something which is very small at the moment, but becoming bigger. And I think it's the cutting edge of the process of realization. Having reached the point where we are conscious of soul, this other realm, some souls are becoming conscious enough to realize spirit. And what that word refers to, it seems to me, is the potentiality. This formless potentiality from which everything has emerged. So when we wake up spiritually, what's actually happening is that a particular soul, psyche, is becoming conscious that essentially everything is arising from one spirit, one potentiality, one being. So everything is one being evolving. The universe is self-realizing. And when we wake up, when we have that profound experience of awakening, which is characterized and always has been by a profound sense of oneness, it's because we're discovering the oneness from which everything has arisen, which is traditionally called spirit. My approach to everything in philosophy is to start with the obvious. I'm a philosopher because I want to understand my own experience, fundamentally, and then share that with others. So when I look at who I am, when I ask the big question, who am I see three levels to my identity, which coincide, I think, actually with a very traditional view which has been misunderstood. And the traditional words are body, soul, and spirit. Body's nice and easy. It's an amazing thing, very complicated, of course, but there's this body which is something we can sense. We can look at it, we can touch it, we can hear it. What's soul? Well, people use the word in many, many ways. What I like to do is return to its original meaning. And if you go back in the West, the original word is psyche, the Greek word, which means soul. And what it's referring to is obvious. It's not like, do we have a soul? We are a soul. There's no doubt about that, because soul refers to this other dimension of experience we're having right now, in which we hear the meaning of the words, where we have ideas, where we have memory, where we can imagine. You can call this domain many names, and they all have a different flavour. But for me, they're just different words for the same thing, essentially. Imagination, mind, psyche, soul. They're all referring to this other realm which is the most important thing we experience. It's what makes us who we are. And it's not made of matter. And just look now. It's not. And we have this idea that the soul is in us somehow, but it's not. Just have a look. The soul isn't anywhere. It doesn't exist in space. It's not made of matter. So how could it? It's a different dimension of experience. So that's body and soul. And they're really obvious. You can just see them, because we're experiencing them all the time. And then there's spirit. And again, people use the word in many different ways, but I'm going back to the original meaning of the word, I think, which is often pneuma or nous. It's also the same in the East, of course. They call it Atman or Buddha nature, which is that there's a flow happening of sensation, which is body. There's a flow happening of imagination, which is soul. And then the question is, who's experiencing all of that? Who's the experiencer? That thing we call I. What is our being? And that's spirit. And the great teaching in all the mystical traditions that I've studied and written about is that our deep being, whatever name you call it, is essentially formless, which sounds very strange. But what it's saying is, look, your being that's looking, you can't see it, because it's not made of anything. It has no shape. It's not a colour. Those are all things you look at. You can't hear it. It's silent. Because everything you hear is an experience. It's the experiencer. It's not an idea. it's formless, but it's experiencing all the forms. And because it's formless, there's no boundaries to it. So as you wake up to your spirit, you find that it's one with all spirit, or you wake up to your being, you see that all being is essentially one being. And what's happening there, I think, is that we're discovering that everything has been arising from, and what we essentially are, is the source of the universe, which is the formless potentiality. So my presence, my being as the experiencer, is the formless potential to experience anything that happens to be experiencing this. So my formless spirit is experiencing my soul, all my thoughts and images, and body, all my sensations. And those are the three levels of our identity, which are obvious if you just pay attention to the moment. Mm. In recent years, we've seen quite a few interesting attempts to bring science and spirituality together through an evolutionary understanding. The problem that I've found is that they don't address what is traditionally the core message of spirituality, which is death is not the end. And a lot of these attempts to bring together science and spirituality say nothing about death. So what I've wanted to do is to be able to articulate an evolutionary understanding which captures my intuition and the intuition of all of the great spiritual traditions that death really isn't the end. And that's not an embarrassing woo-woo thing to say. It's absolutely an intellectually respectable thing to say. And that we can understand the nature of reality in a way that makes perfect sense of that. So what I'm suggesting is that the soul level we're experiencing now has evolved from the biological level, and it's another dimension. It's the dimension of the imagination which we experience in dreams, and that we are able to survive and carry on as soul after the death of the body, because the soul is not made of things, it's made of information. It's a process in time. And a simple analogy for that, which may help, because it's a big story to tell quickly, is if you think, when I was writing the book, I was writing it on a computer, and you'd think that the information and the computer were the same thing, but they're not, because the information was actually stored in the cloud. So if I'd broken my computer and dropped coffee on it and the whole thing had exploded, it would look like, well, that's the end of the computer and all the information. But actually, it wouldn't be, because the information existed on another dimension, which wasn't local and could be picked up anywhere. And so a bit like that, a bit like, look, this other dimension is a dimension, a higher dimension of information in which we continue, which we are in now and which we can continue in. So the whole question around death becomes really simple. It becomes the question, do we survive death, is when this body dies and the experience of sensation ends, does the experience of imagination continue? And my answer is yes. We enter a communal dream space. And when you listen to people's near-death experiences, that's exactly what they're relating. And even more interesting, I'm saying, and this is where I'm asking spirituality to think in a new way, I'm saying this realm of heaven doesn't exist eternally. It has evolved, like everything. I guess the essential idea in emergent spirituality is that everything has evolved, including the soul, including heaven, actually including God. So that the story of heaven is one of evolving from the descriptions the Greeks give it of a land of shades and very nebulous as it's just arising, becoming a projection of our fantasies in life, because that's what it is. The drinking halls of Valhalla or the hunting grounds and all of that. Then the great religions emerge, and then we find heavens full of Buddhas and saints and angels, right through to today where people's NDEs are full of great cities and beautiful gardens and all sorts. And that is a reality. And it's a reality which has emerged from this world, so that matter has become life, and life has become soul or imagination. And that is what enables the soul to enter, to arise as a immortal time stream, something which doesn't dissipate like the body does. The deepest aspect of spirituality is about waking up to oneness. But because it gets stuck in either-or thinking, it thinks we need to wake up to oneness by avoiding or erasing even our separateness. There's an ego which is in the way. Tim is the problem. If I could just get rid of Tim, I'd be this, awake being. I think that is profoundly mistaken. I think our individuality is not a problem. Our individuality is the whole point. We are waking up. We are the oneness, the formless oneness, becoming realized in all these different forms, so that our unique individuality as a soul, it is not an error. It's where the universe has arrived at. And the waking up to oneness doesn't happen instead, but as well. In fact, it happens through it. We are only conscious at all because we are individuals. And the more individual we become, the more conscious we become. So, ironically, if you want to wake up to the one, you need to become more and more of a someone. You need to think for yourself, throw off your conditioning, be your own person. And then you'll be conscious enough to discover this deep being where we're all one. And that's not then an exit door. It's actually the opposite. That is when you find the real empowerment and the love to enter into your individual journey. And your job then is to realize your unique potentials. This whole universe is an evolutionary journey. You are part of it. And your job, your purpose, becomes to realize the deepest, most emergent potentials in your unique soul. And the awakening allows you to do that, not to avoid it. So that the awakening and the individuality are always two and one. The oneness and the separateness come together. Both and, not either or. The story in emergent spirituality, the worldview, is a very big worldview. It starts a long time ago and it makes a huge journey. And where it ends is somewhere very important to me. Ever since I can remember, on my journey and my exploration of spirituality, I have had an experience of being in the presence of something greater than myself. A being of love. Something full of goodness. Totally benign. And of course the traditional word for that, which many, many people experience, is to call it God. Now, it's a difficult word, but that's the traditional word. But it seems to me that we have a problem with God, which is why science has taken off in the way it has and why we've ended up with such a bleak universe and a soul crisis, is if you put God at the beginning of time, which is where most theologies place the divine, there's some really hard questions, impossible questions. There's what in theology traditionally is called the problem of evil, which is essentially, if there's a being of goodness at the beginning who creates all of this, even if that being creates it through evolution, which has become popular to think, why these horrors? Why the horrors? And you can get around it and go, well, human beings are, do bad things, but it's not just human beings. It's like in nature, the horrors, the level of suffering which is inherent in the universe. And then you can add to that what I jokingly call the problem of absurdity, which is we now know that there were 120, 180, even million years of dinosaurs, for instance. Well, it's pretty difficult to see why God, who wanted to arrive at this place where we're souls and evolving and all our beauty, why we had to go through 120 million years of big reptiles tearing the hell out of each other. So it seems to me the problem is, put it frankly, and I don't want to upset anyone, but really, if God's at the beginning of time, he's insane and a monster, which is why so many people have rejected that. And science is much more elegant. It goes, look, the reason we've had dinosaurs is because it's kind of random. It's like genes doing their thing, and and the reason it's taken so long is because no one's got a blueprint at the beginning. There's no one saying this is the way it is, and certainly not goodness, which is why the more primitive levels of the universe don't show goodness. Goodness arises either love, justice, equality, all these arrive last. So I think that's the clue. So the clue is, the deeper potentials arrive last. So soul arrives last. Chemicals arrive first. So, and then in human culture, the same. The deepest things, compassion, these are late arrivals. And then I've said in the book, look, the cutting edge of that is when we wake up spiritually. And what do we wake up to? We wake up to oneness. And we become conscious that essentially everything is arising from one being or one spirit. And what I want to suggest is that God, therefore, is not at the beginning of time, but at the end. Or more accurately, the most emergent potential, the deepest, most emergent potential is the evolution of a being of love that transcends us. And the ideas that I explore in the book is that just as cells in my body have come together to form one thing, which is greater than each individual thing, which is my body, so individual souls, through spiritual awakening, especially in the after-death state, are coming together to form something transcendent, a transcendent being, transcendent spirit. And that spirit is a being of love, because love is how that oneness feels. So the greatest goodness is where this is going. And as we awaken and as we evolve, we are bringing God into being. And God is becoming greater all the time. And that is the true greatness of that transcendent spirit. And whilst I can't know what it is to be God any more than a cell in my finger can know what it's like to be Tim, I really do know what it's like to commune in God. And that feels like love.